So this one is funny because this is my first on a nailed whiff spectrum, squarely in the middle.
You got to nail her with
that's
it.
The thing is, it's supposed to nail her with it. But
wait a minute. Is this like when you're putting the nail in and you do hit the nail, but you also hit yourself with the thumb?
Yeah, or you bend the nail, kind of a thing.
Okay.
Like, because
you hit it, but
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 434 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the web programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artist. Are you stumbling?
He's not sure.
I was trying to figure out what I do on the web, because do I develop it? Do I spin it? Do I get caught in it? There's just so many things that can happen in a web. And I just, for a second, I was like, which one of those?
Which one of the many?
Yeah. Do you think the people who actually develop the web are upset that they aren't referred to as web developers?
Well, that's the thing about web developers is that the range of things that they do is so wide, because you could be like operating on the guts of the internet, or you could be like making a little animated guy jump around on a web page, like
that's
it's
true.
Just there's a whole argument about like, what's a game developer? Is QA a game developer, or is, whatever. It's like, just it's the whole fucking. There's a million jobs that go into.
If your whole job is making raycast shadows, are you a game developer?
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah,
you could tell me it's fancier than I don't know anything.
Well,
else.
It depends. Are we raycasting a shadow in just an architectural VR simulation? That's true. Because if so, then absolutely not.
Now you're an architect.
Right. But if you put a gun in there, now it's a game. So now you're good to go.
Facts.
Yeah, if you use Unreal to do anything, I think you're probably a game developer at that point.
Welcome.
Yeah. And if not, again, just put a gun in it and now it's a game and you're good to go.
Problem solved.
Also, there's going to be swearing on this show. There already has been, but there's going to be more.
Was there? I was trying not to because I knew the warning hadn't happened yet.
There's going to be casual, light profanity, but that's okay.
I know there will be
the profane.
But
there will be.
Was there already?
There was, but that's okay. If people have been listening this long, there's a pretty good chance they know what they're getting into, And if you're a first-time listener, hey, welcome. Sorry about that. Don't worry about it. Let's keep going.
Yep.
All right, here we go. Also, today is September 22, 2023, and we'd like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thanks so much for your monthly donations.
Yeah.
All right. So we got a bunch of stuff to talk about today.
Let's go.
Well, all right. So first, some surprising non-news. Last week, we talked the whole time about Unity and what they were doing with this absolutely atrocious price thing.
Just the most impressive bad business move we've, I think, ever seen.
Really. And so it was so bad that, we thought that by the time this episode that episode would have aired, which was on Wednesday of the following week, so several business days later, surely the backlash over the weekend and over the week and everything would have prompted a backtracking or a full retraction of the policy that they had come up with, and there has been absolutely nothing. Sorry, it's not nothing. There's been two things.
Yeah, there's been.
First thing was a public statement where Unity did not apologize for what they did. They apologized for creating confusion and angst among game developers. So again, nobody was confused. For just to want to point that out, we all know exactly what is happening here. There is angst because everybody's worried that they're screwed, right? But
angst feels like a very low level description of what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's very much I'm sorry if what I said offended you, as opposed to I'm sorry I said that thing. That was a dumb, bad thing to say. I won't do it again. That's a real apology, not the I'm sorry that you felt the way that you felt, right? Which is the apology that we got from Unity. So no visible policy changes. On Monday this week, there was a leak of an internal meeting that they had where they were discussing capping the per install fee at 4% of a company's annual revenue, which at that point it's literally just a revenue share. So
just with extra steps,
with a lot of extra steps.
I think what they're trying to do here, and I can't remember if we talked about this last week or not, but it looks like what they're trying to do is they're saying we want a percentage of revenue. But getting that information is really human costly because you have to like interact with their company. There's a bureaucratic, process where you have to figure out like you have to have lots of legal stuff involved, and you have to have the ability to look into other companies' books, and you have to be able to know if they are actually telling you the truth. And all it's actually extremely expensive. It's like collecting taxes, right? There's a reason the IRS is an expensive operation because it's just really expensive to use this kind of a mechanism, a revenue share mechanism, right? Because taxes are also revenue share, right? So it's just expensive to do it. And so they're like, we want this to be automatic. What's the one thing, the exactly one automatable thing we can do, right? Which is have every single game that goes out phone home. We can do that, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's this number we can get, the only number we can get without involving people.
Attach a bill to that.
Yeah, so let's just put a bill on it. And so my guess is that they're trying to avoid in all ways that they can having to actually involve people in this revenue collection mechanism, right?
Which is crazy because Unity as a company has 7,700 employees.
Yeah, I don't know what they're all doing. It's weird.
It's an alarmingly huge number. I think so. When Unity first appeared back in like the mid 2000s, they had the engine, and then they made a game as well with the engine as a proof of concept, and they had, I believe, something like 12 to 15 people on the team. And they expanded over the next decade or so. And they grew up to like a couple hundred people, and then they started like acquiring other companies and like acquiring advertising companies and all this stuff. And the personnel roster just like ballooned out of control.
Well, then they went. I think then they went public, and they had to show growth for growth's sake. So they just kept on.
You just keep on doing stuff. And so it's been this weird thing where like as the company's gotten bigger, their burn rate is getting higher and higher, and all of the engine features for the past like probably 7 years have largely been not very good, and most of the updates have actually just been about Unity as a company trying to find ways to get more money from developers because the company's sinking because their expenses have ballooned out of control. Mm-hmm. And that's not even going into the $150 million they paid to their executives every year, right? So the whole thing is just like a lesson in bad management. And so again, a non-apology on Monday, some kind of weird internal meeting leak. And then the only other thing that's happened is I think it was Thursday morning this week. They took down the FAQ that they had about the pricing change, which had it answered people's questions about the pricing change, but it just confirmed everyone's fears is what the FAQ was doing, right? They took down that page and then they replaced it with a single sentence, which basically said like, hey, we're sorry. We're trying to do better. We will have some updates on the per install fee structure like coming soon, right? So there wasn't really an indication that they're going to undo this decision,
which is really what you're looking for. You could say like, oh, we recognize this is bad and we're going to figure out something else, but that's not what's happening with so far. It just seems
they're being very cagey.
We're going to still do this. And that's
what it seems like.
Yeah. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll give it another week.
Now the problem here is in the meantime, all of this. So I just to kind of like keep an eye on what's going on. As soon as Unity dropped this news, I subscribed to the various Unity subreddits so I could try to get a sense of like, what are people thinking about? How are they dealing with this? What's the community talking about? And the first couple days after the pricing structure announcement, it was very much a just panic, but also a this can't be real. Let's just wait and see kind of thing. As the days go by and Unity remains silent, those subreddits are turning more and more into people banding together and helping each other find ways to migrate their games to other engines, right? And like the and a lot of conversations about broken trust and like all the stuff that we talked about last week on the podcast, right? And so as time goes on, this void of communication that Unity has left is allowing these communities to figure out ways to get the hell out of Dodge, and they're doing it. So it's and like you can go even look at like the graphs for the Godot subreddit, and the number of people in that subreddit is just skyrocketing because people are just migrating away from Unity. A lot of people who are less informed are coming in to the Unity subreddit, who are just like, oh yeah, I'm thinking about getting into game development. Is this a good engine? And everybody's like, no.
Sucks. That really sucks.
And this is people who, up until now have been huge advocates for the engine, right?
Well, then we also saw, I think it was yesterday or a couple days ago, Relogic, who makes Terraria and has basically infinite money, right? But they put out a statement that they were donating $100,000 each to 2 different open source projects. One of those was Godot. The other one was something FNA, which I've never heard of before. And $1,000 monthly indefinitely ongoing donations to try to prop up those projects. And then we have all these other developers who are like banding together, the successful developers, right? Like signing these 500 large developer, group statements against this thing. So, and lots of money and just free advertising is going to these, all other game engines, but in particular Unreal, and then these open source projects. So there's nothing that anybody could have ever done to prop up these other projects, these competitors to Unity, as powerfully as Unity did with this move. It's just truly, it's kind of like, it's the whole Elon Musk thing with Twitter, right? Like the only reason Twitter still exists at all is because nobody else has made a good enough Twitter clone that people want, right? But people have been nobody was looking for an alternative until then, and then everybody was, right? And all of these companies that had like stuff that people that wasn't even that good, really, suddenly saw these huge influxes of like 100,000 people trying to join or 1 million people trying to join, right? Like the kind of stuff, again, you could never pay for in a million years. It's just the opportunity was huge. It was all because somebody else fucked up so badly. It's amazing.
Well, this is kind of the weird kind of inherent conflict with being a publicly traded company or a company that's focused on growth like this. So if you think about what happened with Twitter, Twitter has so fucking many users, and it's just a platform for posting short messages publicly. That's what it is for. Plus, you can embed videos and pictures, but it's not like an incredibly complicated sort of thing that it's doing, right?
Yeah. It's complicated because of scale, because it's just so big.
Right. The tech underlying it, but yeah, as far as like what it does is a simple concept, right? And as a result, all Twitter has to do is just continue existing and not fuck around, right? And because of what Musk has been doing with it, people have been looking for an escape hatch, which is why, of course, when Threads appeared, it hit 100 million users in 5 days, right? Because people and the problem is it didn't actually have a feature set comparable to Twitter, even just basic things like, I guess it was like searching tags or, just like some pretty basic stuff that like was part of the core functionality. And so the problem is like people want a way out, but then, when sometimes it looks like there is one and then it turns out to just be like a dead end. Right?
Yeah, but that's because everybody goes and tries it, right? Because that's the thing you can't do that otherwise. Like it's impossible to go against an incumbent like Unity or like Twitter, right? Because nobody's even willing to try. Why would they? Why would they go through the effort of being like, let me go sign up for this competing service, right? Unless they have been so incentivized to leave in mass that they actually do go try it. And then that's the moment where if you're not ready for that and you can't, and that was probably like there were, some of these competitors early on in the early Musk takeover days, like people liked, but they weren't ready for scale. Like Hive collapsed instantly. And also none of them were ready because they didn't have their security practices. It was one of those like good examples of why when you're building web tech, you build for security and scale out of the gate. And you'll see all these people who are like, don't worry about that stuff. You can solve that later, like when you need to, because most things aren't successful. Like, that's all true. But if you are successful, the success can get destroyed. And if you don't understand where the success is going to come from,
especially when the power of the thing you're talking about is its scale, which is what you're
exactly.
So if it doesn't scale, it doesn't work, right? So like that's the only reason for it to exist.
I feel like we've just had a number of these instances this year in the tech space of this self-immolation that then provides a lot of warmth to competitors in the space.
Yeah, it's honestly great. We need to break up some of these monoliths.
Fascinating, but
yeah. Well, but this also kind of runs counter to reality, where like if you're a company like Unity, and you're publicly traded, you are supposed to be showing growth every quarter in your public financials, but there isn't a constantly growing supply of game developers. Mm-hmm. Like it's probably growing a bit, but if we're talking like every year there's a couple percent more game developers than there were the year before. If you're showing a couple percent growth, your stock's going to tank, and apparently that matters. So instead, what invariably happens is you will go into anti-competitive stuff to try to like make sure there are no competitors for your customers to go to. And the other thing is
cash extraction.
Once you can't get any more customers, you just try to extract cash. And this is one of those gambles where they thought, where are they going to go? Like, what are they going to do? If we take half their money, what are they going to do? Right. It's very much a shakedown. Right.
Well, and there's a real, and we're talking about all these cases of people like literally leaving the engine, and people who've been working on projects even for like years who are like, all right, and figuring out how to port stuff over. Right. But the reality for most people and companies is that they can't afford to do that. Yeah. They really are just stuck with whatever
they are stuck.
Decides, And so,
but the problem is they're stuck for now because right now,
if they survive after they get through the next game,
because their choice is essentially release our game and possibly be financially ruined by Unity's pricing model, or port our game and be financially ruined just by
porting
expenses, right? Yeah. And so in either case, Unity will have this customer only for a short amount of time because they just will stop existing as an entity, right? So it's such an insane, it's the most short-sighted strategy that you could possibly take, right? But that also would explain why so many of the board and executives sold tens of thousands of shares or more of Unity stock in the past year, right? So I don't know. The whole thing is pretty fucked. There's an assumption floating around that Unity is, because they've been silent and or like what they have said implies that they are not going to backtrack on this decision, or if they do, it'll be a pretty minor backtrack.
They're just trying to figure out how to make it palatable enough that they can get away with it.
And they're also probably doing that thing that a lot of companies do, which is assume that the reaction you're getting is temporary outrage and not
it'll
real
blow over,
and just put your head down, be quiet, and let it blow over. So they've gone more than a week. I think they announced the pricing change on like Tuesday or Wednesday last week. And nothing. And the assumption is that if anything, maybe at the end of the day on Friday, so today when we're recording, they'll put out some kind of statement sort of doubling down. But coming into the weekend where like the news outlets won't be writing about it and stuff. So that
stocks
it kind of
trade.
Right, because stocks don't trade over the weekend. And, it's kind of to me, it's kind of a thing where like if you're doing something that is so unpopular that you think it's going to collapse your stock price, maybe think of a different plan.
Well, let's get into the other fun news though on the industry side this week, because there's been just all sorts of things. I feel like I don't know what's happening.
Every once in a while, lots happening at once.
We're getting into October, okay?
Spooky. We're in Skeletember, which I learned
Skeletember. That's the precursor to Spooktober.
Yeah, which is Halloween creeping into September, which I'm down. I'm down with Halloween creep.
Halloween could creep all the way up to February, and I would.
Yeah.
I want it to just be I want all year to have the vibe of Halloween and just every other thing. So like Halloween, Christmas, like every other holiday just is
gets infected.
A layer on top. of the baseline of Halloween.
Like you want to get somebody a Valentine's gift, you get them a skeleton and some chocolates,
Yeah, a fucking skeleton with its rib cage with a heart, a chocolate heart inside of it.
Yeah. So delicious.
So
and maybe a head full of like delicious custard or something.
Got like a jelly brain.
Jelly brain.
Well, yeah, the news though is picking up, I feel like, right? Because this other thing happened this week was this Xbox leak popped off and everyone's losing their marbles.
Yeah, so here's the deal. Microsoft has Xbox Game Pass. It's a subscription service. We have put stuff in there before. Levelhead was in there. And there's a certain, model that they have. It works differently than just selling your game on like Google Play or something because it's a subscription service, right? So when you put your game into that service, oftentimes, you would be talking with Microsoft and they would essentially like pay you some kind of an upfront license or something like that to put your game into there, right?
Because effectively they're going to be giving your game for free to a bajillion people, right? So basically you're trying to do some little math on like
you're trying to do essentially damage control, which is like if somebody's a Game Pass subscriber and then they also buy games on Steam, right? Then if you put your game onto Game Pass, that person is not going to buy your game on Steam. Right. So there's kind of like a trade-off there. So even if Microsoft said, oh, yeah, we'll give you like 10 cents for every hour that somebody plays your game. Right. It's like, OK, well, even then.
Right. Is this good? Whatever.
Yeah. And so there's like the typical exchange is, Microsoft pays, you put the game on there, and then there may be some other kind of like residuals or something like that.
Yeah, but they're basically paying for uncertainty for the publisher of the game. Right.
Yeah.
For like what. So they have to pay enough that publisher is like, I'm not worried about the risk of cannibalizing sales on their platforms or launching their platforms later. Both of those probably, right? Because the amount of money we're getting paid comfortably offsets how much we think we would be earning on these other platforms if we didn't do this.
Yeah. And of course, if it's an exclusive, that changes things even more because now you're guaranteed to not make a sale on Steam or anywhere else, right? So they have to ask even higher.
Well, especially if you're talking AAA games, right? Because like the amount of money they're going to make on Steam is fucking astronomical, right? So, so these numbers can get really, really big because what you're paying for is that combo of like that offset of what somebody would be making out everywhere else.
Plus then also just the value that the platform, that's like the biggest one, is actually just the value the platform sees in what that title brings to their portfolio.
Yeah.
Right? So this is also an interesting thing with subscription models that differs from the rest of actually all the storefronts, which is that, Steam is an uncaring entity. It doesn't matter that there's 1,000 other FPS games on there. If you want to put your FPS game on there, they're not like, you literally can't. We're not even going to let you.
Steam doesn't operate on a portfolio basis.
Yes. And so it's a really interesting note for, devs who are, especially smaller devs who are trying to get into these various subscription services, is that there is a portfolio factor, which just means that sometimes timing can just not be in your favor. They could be like, sorry, we got too many RPGs coming out. We already got like a full slate of RPGs. We're just hurting for some weird roguelike thing, and you don't have that. So it looks cool, but we can't. Like, we're just not interested.
Yeah, and sort of on the opposite side of that, too, is you can have a game that normally wouldn't be worth as much, but as in like it wouldn't make that much money. But as a complement to a portfolio, it actually adds more value because of how it sits in the whole portfolio, so you can actually get more out of it than you would otherwise.
Yeah. It's just saying like if we add this game to our roster, is there a group of players who will now become subscribers, right?
Or
like
who will stick around because of the variety.
Yeah. So what we know is, and we've talked with lots of different people who work in various subscription services, right? And this is the general kind of like approach that they take is, they can't just throw money at every single game. They need some kind of metrics that they're using
and you have to consider the whole store that you're putting together, the whole portfolio to figure out what you actually need. Yeah.
But of course, because, nobody can predict the future. And we've even talked in the past about how like even Valve, who has Steam, where they have metrics on every game.
Everything.
Every PC game, they can track every single little thing about it. And they are a game studio as well because they made Half-Life and Team Fortress 2 and Counter-Strike and Dota, whatever, right?
Artifact. Don't forget Artifact.
Well, exactly.
Well,
Yeah. Because that's the thing is that even though they have the capability to make great games, they have the most data and information that out of anybody else in the entire
infinite money.
world.
Don't forget that.
And they've got infinite resources that even they can have a miss where they launched Artifact and it just didn't go right. And also that's why there was a time where like you did have to pitch your game to Steam, and sometimes they would say no. And then they realized that they would see games that they thought were going to do great, and they would say yeah, and then they would just do nothing at all.
Which
right?
does
And
also bring us to the Baldur's Gate thing with Xbox.
Yeah. So this is what happened this week is there was a leak of
it was the FTC docs for the, I think, right? Wasn't it FTC stuff for the whole antitrust or whatever
for
it
the
is?
merger between Activision and Microsoft.
Yeah, so somebody didn't lock down a URL properly, basically, or they uploaded some stuff to a public part of the FTC like filings or something like that shouldn't have been uploaded there. It was one of those kinds of things. Where
it wasn't a leak so much as just a fuck up, basically. Nobody like here journalist, here's some secret docs, you know. But basically, it was just one of the documents in there was a breakdown of their kind of predictions of how much money they should probably be offering or like be expected to give to get certain games onto Xbox Game Pass. The highest in the list was Star Wars. This is from earlier this year, I think February or something like that. It's like
I think it was 2022, wasn't it?
Or was it last year? Yeah, so it was it was a little while ago. And again, nobody can predict the future, right? So some of the upcoming games at that time that they were looking at was Star Wars Jedi Survivor and Baldur's Gate 3. So Jedi Survivor is made by EA. That's part of a huge pre-existing IP, blah, blah, blah. So they looked at that and they're like, yeah, obviously this is just going to do great. So 300 million.
Yeah, 300 million. That's from a portfolio standpoint, again, you're looking at how do we get games into the service that like, if the game is in the service, that people who aren't on board will get on board, and people who are on board will be like, wow, I'm so glad I'm part of this, right? Which, you could
keep them from leaving because the game's there.
Yeah, any huge AAA game that you can get that especially is a Star Wars game seems like it'd be a good bet, right?
Yeah. And so it's like, so they would need to drop 300 million to compensate for the risk and the lost sales because the game's going to do great and it's going to be a great game, blah, 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 right? And then if you go all the way kind of down the list, all the way to the bottom, you see Baldur's Gate 3. Okay. So at the time that they were making this decision, Baldur's Gate 3 was in early access.
Yeah.
In early access, I think it peaked at something like 15,000 players or something like that. And it was just kind of chilling, at like a couple thousand players a day or something like that on Steam. So, and the general consensus is if you look at a game in early access, then when it actually goes into full launch, you don't really see that much of a change because it's been available the whole time.
Yeah.
Right.
The most you expect is typically a doubling.
Yeah. Like a doubling.
Yeah. If you kind of look through the existing data and stuff, like also like Sam and I did that too before we launched Levelhead and stuff, right? It's like basically what we saw was typically you just like your real launch was like twice as big as the early access launch, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it wasn't even that there was like, because for most stuff, there's huge variation so that the typical case doesn't even matter, but it was actually like really typical.
It's pretty consistent. There are very few outliers there. And of course, then you do occasionally have one that like is just a different thing for whatever reason. But for the most part, it was weirdly consistent.
Yeah. So Xbox evaluated this and they would have thought the same thing that we would have thought, which is, okay, well, like this is like selling solidly. Like this is a good
doing well.
This is doing well and it's going to do well at launch, but this isn't a blockbuster like runaway hit, right?
Yeah, and I also think that at least at some point in time, Baldur's Gate 3 was going to be on like Google Stadia or something.
Yeah, apparently it was originally part of the dev was originally slated for it to come to Stadia. So Stadia shut down though.
Stadia collapsed.
I wonder how much Stadia paid them for that. Probably a lot.
I don't know. No. But it's all gone now because Stadia. Well, I mean, they would have kept the money, but Stadia is gone. And so there was also kind of some considerations in there where they were like, well, it was supposed to be like a Stadia game and now it's not, and that's weird. So they refer to it as like a second run Stadia game. I think it was sort of like I don't know what that means exactly, second run, but essentially, they're just kind of like looking at this game and based on all the metrics. Also, they looked back at Divinity Original Sin, which was Larian's previous game, and it's like, yeah, it did well. And it got good reviews, but also it's kind of a niche. Like it's a very slow paced, story driven game and stuff like that.
Well, I think that's the main thing they were probably seeing is like, they were like, this is a niche and that niche just isn't that big, I think is what.
Yeah. And again, the data totally backs that up. Right. So then when the rubber hits the road, Star Wars Jedi Survivor, to their credit, did actually sell. Like it does have like 50,000 reviews on Steam, and like people bought it because it's a AAA Star Wars game, right? It's got like 50% positive reviews on Steam, so it's very much not that good of a game. And overall on Metacritic and stuff, like it's
fine.
It did.
It's a Star Wars game.
Yeah,
it's a Star Wars game from EA. Like, yeah, what was that mean? It's like, oh, daring today, aren't we? I think I'll have a Star Wars game from EA. So that Baldur's Gate, they went from there like 15,000 whatever peak players in early access to like 875,000 peak at launch.
Well, in
so they didn't double.
Week, they had more players,
even more,
which is funny,
which
is
like
fucking unheard of. That never
so
happens.
hard to do.
So I didn't even know about Baldur's Gate 3 until it started appearing in the World of Warcraft subreddit about 5 days after launch, where people were making like WoW lore characters and the character creator in Baldur's Gate and then taking screenshots and being like, look, I made Thrall in Baldur's Gate. And I was like, Baldur's Gate? Like, that's
I saw somebody doing they were doing a Rick from Rick and Morty playthrough where they were like trying to make a character that looked like Rick. Right. And then they were like, then they were like, what would Rick do? And that was like their playthrough. Yeah.
Oh man. But yeah, you could do just the wildest shit, And so and what I think probably partially explains the early access shift is that because it is a deep story driven game, blah, blah, blah. People who did know about it and were excited about it probably just wanted to wait.
Yeah, wanted to be done before.
Yeah, I saw it. I think I saw when I first saw the first cinematic, but 2 years ago or something. And I was like, I mean, obviously I'm going to play that, but I'm waiting until it's 1.0 because it's a story game, which means I don't want to play it.
Yeah. You don't want to have to replay it
twice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, now that it's out, I am replaying it like 3 times.
Oh,
but but I'm replaying a final version of it and not like some partially completed stuff. Right?
Well, but the thing is, like, you would have had fun playing the partially completed stuff too. It's just in your mind though, in terms of like decision making, because like you don't know how much is going to be there. You just don't know enough about what that experience is going to be like. So it just makes sense to wait, even if you didn't need to strictly.
The note about this that's fun though is that you get to see these little bullet points attached to not just these 2 games, but like just a ton of games that they were trying to figure out if they should include and then how much they should pay for. And there's
they summarize their why, right?
Yeah, like bullet line summaries. And the fact that it's like with Baldur's Gate that it's referred to as a second-rate Stadia RPG, which is clearly I don't know if you're not in industry, I don't know how exactly to frame that to make sure that you understand that is an extremely insulting framing. It's extremely insulting.
But also they also somehow completely overlooked that it's a D&D game. And that actually, because of Stranger Things, like starting with Stranger Things, and it's like Critical Role and stuff. Like D&D
Dungeons & Dragons movie came out,
and like D&D has actually really started
blowing up on Dropout TV. It's huge right now.
It's deeply it's moving out of the basement of nerds and just like into everyone's house everywhere, right? And so and again, like that was a trend that was like ongoing at the time, but and it's in retrospect, everything's obvious, right? And it's like now we can really see that like the success of Baldur's Gate is both capitalizing on the success of D&D now, but it's also driving the success of D&D, right? It's like the self-reinforcing thing. So again, it's really easy to go back and look at this stuff and be an armchair expert and be like, oh, they were so dumb, right? But like they're smart and they looked at a lot of data. And they made the best predictions they could.
Well, and this is why I'm always saying bad data is worse than no data because you make decisions based off of it, right? When it didn't matter that you had data, actually, right? And I think games are one of those cases because the way that you use data to make a prediction is when things behave according to the statistical averages of like the other things that have happened, right? And that's not what games do. Games don't do that.
Yeah.
Every game behaves differently, and there aren't that many, right? Like statistics are when you have infinite data. That's when they're like really meaningful. But the thing that they're never meaningful for is one data point.
Yes,
Ever.
which is typically the reason why if you're in, say, the independent game space and you're trying to pitch to a subscription service, whatever else, you have to be so good at being your own advocate about what your game is and why it is valuable, because
You have to get them away from the numbers.
yeah, well, a little bit, right? Or at least away from the even some of the portfolio stuff. Because again, like this idea that like, oh yeah, we already have an RPG for Q2 next year. So
Yeah,
we don't
but it's like two RPGs aren't the fucking the same, you know?
Yeah,
Imagine
it's like,
if Steam was like, well, we already have Divinity Original Sin, which like gameplay wise is basically the same as Baldur's Gate 3. So like, no thanks.
Yep.
We're not going to let you publish Baldur's Gate 3. It's like, that's not how anything.
or Starfield. I bet a really good example would be Starfield versus Baldur's Gate. It's like they are two completely different experiences, though on like a genre label, they have many overlapping parts, right? And if you try to say like, oh, sorry, we don't have room for Starfield because we got Baldur's Gate, you'd be kind of dumb. If you said they reversed, you'd also be kind of dumb. And so it's like it's not quite an apples and apples swap in and out. And it's very easy to, I think, forget that when you're in the case of like trying to advocate for your own game or whatever else, and not recognize that you could find ways to talk about it where it's very clearly its own thing and drive people to that understanding too.
Yeah, well, to me, the weird thing is, and I feel like this, I could be wrong about this in terms of like how I'm envisioning what's actually going on behind the scenes, but it seems to me that so many of the conversations about what games to bring into portfolios is just, it's all data analysis, right? And one thing that
It's
I don't...
comps, right? It's data
Yeah,
and comps. Yep.
And one thing that I haven't heard of is like, is there a team of people at Microsoft or, you know, any place with a subscription service where their only job is to just play the games that come in that are pitched and give them a good amount of time, right? If you sit down and play a game for 8 hours, like for an entire workday, right? And if you're hooked and you're having a blast the whole time, and like at the end of the day, you're like, oh, I wish I could keep playing this game, you know, then like that's a good game, and you should really think about getting that into your portfolio.
Well, I'll say two things about that without, you know, we can't talk about details of any particular company, right? But we've submitted Crashlands 2 and also Levelhead to lots of different companies for their subscription services and other things, right? And interact with lots of these different teams. And I think what we've consistently seen is there's a strict separation where there's somebody or some very small team. Always, like, you wouldn't believe how tiny these teams are.
Too small.
So there's a tiny
Always
team of
too
people
small.
whose job it is to basically find and evaluate games for sort of suitability on the platform and like really rough, like, is this good? Like, would I want this on the platform? Do I think people would want this on the platform, right? And those people, depending on volume and how much they are hooked just by the idea of a particular game or a studio or whatever, will put playtime in. They'll try it out. They'll play it. They'll listen to your pitch. They'll do all that kind of stuff, right? And then they basically, so you make a case to them, and then they put together a case that goes to sort of the anonymous, bespectacled business people, right? Who then do comps, crunch numbers, and then spit out basically, a magic number of like, okay, here's what we would pay for this, right?
And it is magic in the sense that
It's made. It's
it
just
is
made up.
it is 100% arbitrary. Like it's justified via a bunch of metrics. But it's still arbitrary.
It's just
right?
astrology. It's
Well, it's like you are assigning certain values to things, right? It's not random within itself, right?
Well, yeah,
It's
random and arbitrary aren't necessarily the same. It's that like, arbitrary is just that the number that comes out actually is completely unrelated to the actual value that the game will ultimately bring, right?
Yes.
And like I said, it's justified. As in, like, they have justifications for the number. They have rationales. They've done a lot of reasosoning, and then they, like Adam said, then they come up with a magic number, and that number is fake.
It's just fake.
Yeah, and the problem is, like, because the teams are generally very small, it's oftentimes the people who are receiving the pitches and talking with the studios and stuff, those are the same people who then are like compiling information and then like bringing that to the business people. And it's like that small group can't play all the games.
Yeah, they have
They
very
just don't
limited time. Yep.
Yeah, and they just don't.
But even
have
if they
the
do,
people
if they're
to
going to
do it.
advocate for your game, like still, then some group of number crunching people, right, put together a thing. They send it back to your person there. That person may try to argue for more on your behalf, depending on your relationship with them. And if they think they can pull it off, the company structure and all that kind of stuff, right? And I'll say that like we've had great interactions and great relationships with that entry point person in everywhere we've tried to submit the game. And we've had not bad responses on the other side where the money comes from, right? But usually not sufficient, I guess is the way I'll put it.
I would say
right?
they're very context light.
Yeah.
But also it's always the thing where it's like, what is that? Is that what the opinion of the mainstream audience would be? Because they're just going to be glancing at this.
Yeah, I mean, because the thing is, we don't know either,
I don't
right?
fucking know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we don't know if Crashlands 2 is going to be successful. You know,
Nobody knows.
nobody knows.
So like well, of course we think that Crashlands 2 is worth at least $14 billion.
At
Yeah.
least.
But that's been a hard sell, to be honest, with most of these platforms.
You got to break it down, a little bit.
Yeah, but again, like our number is arbitrary, and so is nobody fucking knows. So, anyways, it was just an interesting. It was an interesting glimpse into behind the scenes, and it's unfortunate that that the general takeaway for a lot of people is just kind of this smug kind of, looking down your nose at Microsoft, like these idiot business people don't know anything about video games, right? It's like none of us know about video games. We don't
After
know.
the fact, if it's going to be successful, but that's not fucking hard.
Yeah,
Just
Steam
look at the
doesn't know.
sales.
Microsoft doesn't know. We don't know. We don't know. If we knew what was gonna like make $100 million, then we would just make that
Yeah, we'd make that.
thing,
That was what we
right?
Yep.
We don't know. So instead, it's like, well, we make something that we like and that we think is going to be fun and
Yeah.
well received,
And then we
But
hope
have-
we could make a living doing that. But that's it.
Yeah, there's no guarantees, right? So anyway, that was just a very interesting look behind the curtain this week. And then I guess the last kind of like bit of, well, it's not news, but it's just a thing, which was we have a nail whiff Starfield review. So out of the gate, Adam, Starfield, did it nail it or did it whiff?
So this one is funny because this is my first on a nailed whiff spectrum, squarely in the middle.
You got a nail or whiff.
That's the thing, is it's supposed to nail or whiff it. But
Oh, wait a minute. Is this like when you're putting the nail in and you do hit the nail, but you also hit
you
yourself
bend
with
it.
the thumb?
Yeah, or you bend the
it.
nail, kind of a
Yeah,
thing.
okay.
Like, because
You hit it, but
yeah, because like I played like, I don't know, a dozen hours of it probably, or something like that. And it's one of those, it's like, it's just this weird thing because like I'm having a good time, but I'm also kind of not having fun, right? So this is why I say
I
like
can
I
hear it in
really
your
believe
voice.
it's like squarely between those things because it's not a whiff and then I'm like, well, fuck this, like I'm not gonna play this, right? But they definitely did not nail it, because like it's the game is trying to do. So we talked about this a couple episodes ago. We talked about the perception of the game when it was going to early access by the people who had played it, but we hadn't played it yet, right?
Would you say that perception was?
I would say that was spot on, which is the game.
Yeah.
Like it's missing some amount of soul where there's just kind of there's a hollowness to the whole experience. And I would say it's a sandbox. It's a sandbox game dressed up as an RPG is how I would describe it. And as we know from trying to make Crashlands games, right? It's really hard to connect like sandboxy crafting sorts of, adventure games to
you can't let somebody go anywhere they want whenever they want.
Yeah. And
also have obviously like linear sequential stories that reasonably
makes sense.
connect
and
to
like
each other. Yeah.
Baldur's Gate 3 is a really good example of like of pulling that off, right?
But
Extreme
even then,
vigilance.
like they do still have,
right?
yeah, they do
Yeah,
still have
it's
these
not-
hard
right.
gates.
Yep.
So, for example, like there may be a point where you're about to go into some new act or like some new major like zone that you haven't been to before, and they'll put a message up and they're like, "Are you sure you want to do this? Make sure you tie up any loose ends before you go, because once you go, they actually like close out a whole bunch of stories.
They lemon real hard, right? They're
Yeah,
like, we're
because it's
clamping
like,
this.
yeah, because even though it is open, they still have to have some kind of common touch points.
Well,
at
and I
various
think
times in the story.
And I think that's a lot of what the kind of consensus around Starfield is that they didn't want to close things off like at all, right? They wanted you to be able to do anything, which I don't dislike. It is very cool that you can be like, I'm both a pirate, I'm both a pirate as part of like the pirate crew, and I'm also like a police officer on this other planet, and I'm also like an adventurer, and you're just all of the things, and you can kind of like choose how you want to. Like you can have, because like the dialogue choices are influenced by the things that you've participated in, so like I'm currently simultaneously wanted by the law, and I'm also
the law.
I'm also the law, and I'm also like I'm like 4 incompatible things, and I'll be in a dialogue with somebody, and like those 4 incompatible options kind of come up of like, oh, I can just choose what hat I'm wearing right now, right?
But to me, this makes sense in one dimension, which is like, yeah, if there's like 4 different planets, then it makes a lot of sense that those planets wouldn't have such deep communication networks with each other.
Yeah, well, the thing is
be,
it works though. It does work, and so I'm enjoying it as basically kind of a choose your own adventure sandbox game, but sort of the consequence of that is like everything doesn't feel like it matters very much, right? But my biggest complaint is not that, because I think that all feels like it makes sense and it's fine, and like the stories that are there, many of them are still fun. There's still some fun character stuff, and so I don't think that's really. I think the problem for me is really the same stuff we talked about a couple weeks ago,
moment to moment,
which is just how little they give a shit about your moment to moment experience. And like, I don't like, there's the amount of depth actually to the systems of the game is enormous. You just don't know it because nothing is fucking explained to you, right? Like, and you don't have access to the information that you would need. And I think sort of the quintessential example of this is I've been avoiding space combat stuff because it's clunky as hell and very confusing. They didn't like when I get through the little tutorial, they were like, "Oh, do these things," and I was like, "Why?" Like I don't know how this is supposed to work. And it just kind of feels like you just turn in circles and shoot at stuff, right? And I'm pretty sure that is how it works. Like I don't know. So like it wasn't fun, and it was like just stressful and confusing, and so like I've been avoiding it. But then on Monday night, I was like, okay, I'm going to go like watch some videos about how to actually make a spaceship. Because I also went to the spaceship crafting menu and I couldn't figure out even how to use it because there's no information about that. There's a bunch of like buttons you can use, but like it turns out you have to already have there's like a build menu, but you have to already have a ship. And then you can like delete all the parts of that ship and then rebuild it. Yeah. But depending on where you are, different parts are available when you go to construction, which doesn't tell you. So you don't know how to know like what parts are available, if they're always available, right? And then
I don't know, Adam, this doesn't sound like a UI problem. I think you're just an idiot. I think you're just very dumb.
And then so it's like I'm trying to build a ship, and one of my core things I want to do is I was like, I want a ship where all of the crafting stations are on it. So I don't have to, because like otherwise you just like randomly find a kind of crafting station out in the world. You'll be like, oh, here's a weapon station. Let me go upgrade my weapons like after I get done with this combat I'm doing on this space pirate ship or whatever, right? Ooh, this is my chance to now upgrade my weapons, right? I was like, I want to have everything on my fucking ship. There's literally no way to know which parts of ships give you the different workstations. There's no way to know. The only way to find out is to build the ship, spend the credits, back out of that menu, go in the ship and look. And then if that was wrong, you then have to leave and go resell that part for a lower price because that's how it's always asymmetrical.
Right.
And try. So I ended up just like looking up, somebody had put together a list of like,
oh my God.
So wait, hold on. So you have this like module.
Yeah,
you own it.
You own it.
But you don't know what is in it.
You can't look at it or see
you don't know what's in there. Yeah. So you might know there's a few stats that are listed, which is like how many crew does this support or how many whatever,
but
right?
like functional utility of it is not part of that description.
Yeah.
It's
like
you
can have a
it's just not in there.
So it's almost like you're building a ship by going to a storage auction, where they like have
exactly. Yeah, you just like
things people haven't paid for. Yeah, and you're just like, I want to buy this crate and open it up, and I'll build my ship out of that.
Yeah, and so
no, other way around. Build your ship, then open it up.
That's true.
Yeah.
Buy it.
Yeah, you buy all the parts, put it together, and then you're like, okay, what did I get? And it was, and there are some like patterns there where it's like if it ends in a workshop, then it has like one of the stations in it, and if it, there's like a science thing, and that's going to have your like research station or whatever. So there are some things that like there is a pattern that holds true, right? But it turns out like there is, but they sometimes will have another station in them.
Yeah, of course.
And there's no way to know that. And then there's like one fucking component that has all of the stations in it, but it's named the same as the rest of them.
Nice.
So the only way to know is to have happened to have bought that one and then walked inside of it. Right.
The usefulness of information asymmetry or obfuscation in a design, right?
Yeah.
And
I think that's where Starfield fails the most aggressively is
because they're trying to say like there's always the argument present, which is like it's better to not show certain things, right? Which can be very true, right? Because it can either facilitate community stuff or it can lead to
but that's not a general
discovery.
Argument. That's just one of the approaches you can take to information is do we tell them or not? But you have to have a reason why you're telling people or not. And Sam, as you're saying, like, one of the reasons might be like, okay, it's going to push people out into the broader world so they communicate with each other, and you can kind of drive community engagement. But this kind of thing is not that. And I think that's the general experience with the game is that there's this weird level, like this huge level actually of depth. Because there's also this whole like mining thing where you can like set up mining operations and staff them and all this kind of stuff, right? But even something as simple as like how persuasion checks work or how lockpicking works, right? Those are things that like my wife has also been playing a bunch, and both of us, like we've played all the Fallouts, we've played all the games that this is just like a clone of, right? And played lots of other video games. And both of us like ended up with completely different assumptions about how things work. And we're extremely confused about even things like how do persuasion checks work, right? Because the first time you see one, there's a little bar that you have to fill, but it's like gray on gray. So you don't even know. It's like easy to miss. It's easy to miss that it's there, but you also don't know what it is. You don't know what it is, right?
How does it fill? Like,
so then you get choices of like responses you can make, and there's then red, yellow, or green, red, and yellow, right?
So if you're colorblind, then I guess
that would be a problem. Yeah.
Yep.
And they have like a plus some number on them, right? And then it's like whatever the dialogue is that you're going to say. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, green means this is something that'll work. I don't know what the +1 means, but presumably that's just not very much persuasion,
it's like
right?
riskier options, basically.
Yeah, then I was like, red must mean it won't work, and and the number gets bigger as it goes from green to red.
Or is red like this is a hostile thing you're trying to do, and green is like it's a friendly thing?
Oh, actually, that was my first interpretation until I read the text, and I was like, that can't be it, right? So but that was the thing is like I had to like try to reason through the design choices of this thing, because what should have been really obvious, which is, there's a number of bars you have to fill. This is the number that if you pass it will get added to that bar, right? And
it's harder.
And it gets harder. It just means decreases likelihood. So it's actually very straightforward and simple once you know what it is, right? But there's so many other ways you could interpret it that without sufficient information given to you, then and I feel like that's like the whole every interaction with the game is this, where there's like a lot of ways you can interpret how you're supposed to interact with the thing. And once you figure out what it is, it's usually like, oh, okay, right? But it's just so easy because it's even stuff like when you're on a planet, you scan stuff, right? It's like you pull out your scanner. But I just thought, because like it gets highlighted when you look at it, and I was like, oh, is it scanned, right? Because it doesn't actually, like, you don't see what's happening. And then I realized there's just like underneath that like reticle, there's a bunch of like indicators of what buttons you can push to do things, right? And one of them is scan. And I just like didn't look underneath that part of like the interface to be like, because I just thought I was scanning stuff by having my scanner open and
it's changing,
and looking at it because it would get highlighted, right? And I was like, oh, it must be scanning it. And it took me like a fucking hour of gameplay to realize. I was like, why isn't this doing anything? I don't understand what is going on here. And because you can't scan everything, and like what buttons are visible changes depending on what you're looking at. And so like when I'm looking at a creature to scan it, I'm also chasing the creature. I'm not looking at those buttons. I didn't realize that they switched from something that didn't have a scan option to something that has a scan option now, right? It's like that kind of stuff where like everything is designed so it's so easy.
So here's a question
to misunderstand what to do.
Because I think part of the appeal of these very large, more sandboxy games, but just like very large, especially space-related games, is the idea that it is a huge thing that will take a very long time for you to discover all the stuff about, right?
Yeah, which to me is not a selling point. But I agree that is the.
It may not be for you, but it may also just like that's part of the like idea, right? Wow, so many things. Who even knows, right? But to what degree is it the case that the discovery happening here is the kind where once you actually know how it works, it's not like particularly, interesting or cool or like different, but it was obfuscated. So it seemed like there was a lot of complexity, or it seemed like there was a lot of depth, when really there's just some information left out that you need to click a button, or they just don't tell you that there's fucking workshops.
I think it actually just, there is a lot of stuff. And whether or not it's interesting is
good.
Sort of question. Right? There is a lot of stuff. It's actually, I think the trouble that they had is there are so many systems you can engage with in the game that they couldn't figure out how to train you and how to design UIs that let you engage with all of those systems, right? In a way that, because like if they had actually tried to teach you everything about how the game works.
Yeah, you'd be 12 hours in.
Yeah,
and
you'd
still
be just
like,
hours of tutorial stuff, right?
tutorial. Well, I wonder why, because people talk about like, oh yeah, the game gets good after like 12 to 15 hours, right?
Yeah,
Is that just because at
you
that
have to
point
learn how to play it, basically.
Yeah, at that point you just have sort of a grasp on what the fuck you're even looking at.
Right.
Well, and also, there is so much stuff that is just confusing in terms of like how you engage with the game at the beginning. That I think a lot
even
of
once even once you know it, it's still confusing.
Yeah, and it's so like they could have made it so that it felt better much sooner by just making even the easy stuff more, because like also you can like get it, like knowing what to spec into, right? Because it turns out like you can get booster packs that let you do some kind of just jetpacking around, which is then super useful, right? But like that's something you just kind of stumble into. And the only reason I even knew to like pay attention to was because I just happened to see a video of somebody talking about, hey, when you're playing Starfield, here's where you should spend like your first skill points, right? Because like you can choose
anything.
It takes so long to fill out that tree. You can choose anything, right? And it would be a waste to choose most things, because like if you don't spec a point into jetpacks, you basically can't even traverse the world in an appropriate
So this is the
way.
shit that gets me fired up though, because it's like, okay, so you have an illusion that there's a lot of choice out of the gate and a lot of complexity that you have to deal with. But in reality, player needs a fucking jetpack. They need to be able to lockpick stuff. They need to be able to do X, Y, Z.
Well, and the consequence of not having those things is just that everything is slower and worse. It's not interesting.
Yeah.
Right?
So again, like, why just give the player the jetpack?
Well, on that note, here's what I did. I made a bespoke experience for myself where, because it's a Bethesda game, they got the console, you can open it up and you can just give yourself stuff, right? So
yeah, let's go.
So I did a few things. One is also, this is a game where you're traversing entire fucking worlds in a spaceship, collecting huge amounts of resources to like craft things and build spaceships, build outposts, like mining outposts and stuff, right? You gotta carry a lot of shit.
Yeah, if you want to build a spaceship, I feel like you need to carry at least 30 or 40 pounds worth of
You
stuff.
need a few things, right? But true to form, like inventory management is fucking brutal in this game. Like the first few hours I played, the first hour was clean because I didn't have anything in my inventory yet. But then the next like 3 hours of gameplay, easily 2/3 of that was just dealing with my fucking inventory. Be like, oh god damn it, I'm full again. I gotta like decide what to throw away. And you don't know the value of stuff yet because you don't understand the systems and right. And so you don't know what's good, what's worth keeping, whatever. And you don't have any money. You don't know if money is useful. So you're like, I want to sell as many things as I can. So it's just this whole thing. And then the UI sucks. They don't have like the most important number that you need for inventory management, which is value per weight, right?
Isn't worth picking up.
Yep.
Yeah.
They just have two
No
separate columns.
No game does that.
I know, so I'm just doing that math in my head. So I installed a mod that improves that UI to make it all cleaner, let you sort on a whole bunch of metrics, let you add new columns, including value over weight. So I added a mod that did that. I added a mod that sped up transitions between menus, because also like you hit tab to go into a menu and it just feels like it takes an hour, and because you have to manage your inventory so fucking much and you're constantly moving in and out of menus.
So you're telling me that it's purposefully slow?
Like it doesn't have to be that slow.
It doesn't have to be that slow?
Well, it's just like it's got a nice, animation and like.
But it's slow,
It's
right?
it's slow as like because you have to do it so much.
Yeah, if
like
you do it 100 times an hour, it takes
because it's probably
3
like
seconds every time.
Well, it's probably like half a second or something like that, right? Or a second, something like that. But yeah, you're constantly.
Yeah, if
you're just constantly doing that. Like if you hit tab again, like and like you zoom out into bigger views of the map, and also the fucking map, nightmare fuel. Trying to figure out like it took me so long to figure out how to interact with that map and like land on a place on purpose. It's fucking wild. But anyway, so I did that, and then I bumped. So after just fighting inventory and having it be the case where I'd go land on a spot on a planet and like be like, oh cool, there's this huge like thing in the distance, and I run over there. There's like a there's like 100 pirates in this place. And I would like go start walking through this cool, like labyrinthine thing. And I'm like finding loot and killing bad guys, you know, but like 2 steps in, my inventory is full, you know? So after dealing with that for the first, 6 hours gameplay, I was like, fuck this. And I just went into the console and I set my inventory to 9,999. Apparently it can go really high on PC, but I was like, I'll just start with that and see how that works. And then all of a sudden, the game loop was now go explore the world. And then when I'm done with a round of exploration and questing, come back, manage my inventory, sell stuff, you know, craft things, whatever. And all of a sudden I had this like delightfully clean, beautiful loop. That was.
So what you're saying is once you gave yourself an infinite inventory, it became Crashlands, and then it was
exactly. Fun. It was fun. Yeah. And I also identified those other things where I was like, okay, jetpack. Like if I don't have a jetpack, it's just hard to get around, and that just
give me a fucking jetpack.
So I also went to the perk menu and identified a handful of perks that I was like, the fact that I have to spend points into these so that like, because also the world's, I mean, everything is huge. Like it is like the scale is impressive. Like you land, it's a whole ass planet. Like you land somewhere that shows you kind of like unknown waypoints in the distance, and they're like 1,000 meters away, right? And so you just like are walking over there, right? And yeah, there's like aliens.
You can't fly you can't fly over there with your fucking spaceship.
No, because if you take off and land, it's a new spawned in random instance, so it's just a different place.
So you're gonna land on a fucking spaceship that can go to space and travel between planets, and then when you get to the planet, you're like, there's something that's 10 miles away. Yeah. I guess I'll walk.
Yeah, and there's no vehicles. Unfortunately, once you get to a place, you can fast travel to places in that same area that you've been to, you know. But so you can at least get back to things fast. But you have to like there's just so much land traversal, and you have this like oxygen meter that's like if you sprint, just goes down, right? Or if you're over encumbered, really goes down. And it was the same deal where I was like, okay,
so this is like contrived problem because of the spaceship randomized instance thing. They're just like, well, you're gonna have to walk a long way for literally no reason, and now we're also
everything's just big. So I just went in and I just like dumped points. I just like gave myself through the console like fully loaded jetpack, fully loaded whatever the stat is that gives you oxygen consumption reduction, you know, and a handful of things like that were like made it so that. And also, like, dealing with the spaceships sucked, you know? And I was like, okay, I'll just like, throw points into piloting because I'm never going to do that.
But it sounds like to me, it sounds to me, again, like everything you're saying is every aspect of this is annoying as fuck, but I'm still playing.
Yeah.
Right? And we talked about the power of a core
I wouldn't be if I wasn't able to hack it.
But yeah, that's the big one. So I think it's because on the nail and whiff it spectrum, this is not even, it's like a weird, it's a...
That's what I say, it's in the middle somewhere. It's fucking weird.
It sounds like a hard whiff to me.
It sounds like a whiff, but it's a whiff that can be transmuted if you yourself go do a bunch of stuff to make it not suck, and then it's actually pretty good.
Yeah, here's the problem. Yeah. The problem is
you're going to miss the nail the first time. But if you go do a whole bunch of research, watch a bunch of videos, and go learn what to hack to overcome the lame aspects of the game and so on, then you hit the nail again. Then you can hit it.
Yeah, but the problem is like you can hack any game, you know?
Some of the reads are hacked, to be fair. And
some of them are more designed to be hackable, but like it's kind of like like Kerbal Space Program 2, right? Like total whiff, and I don't think it has mod support yet. It might, but I don't think it does, right? But then it's like, all right, well, once they add mods, and then the community comes in and like starts to make the game good sort of modularly, and then if you as a player come in and buy a bad game that you can make good by doing a bunch of like research and work, it's like, to me that's just a whiff.
Okay, well I guess there's two questions.
It should be good at the start, and you can improve.
But there's two spots where we could put the nail that whiffed it, right? Because one is your actual experience with the game, which can be informed by using mods, using hacks, using your community engagement experience, like all that kind of stuff, right? And then the other one is the actual experience provided by the game, right?
Yes.
And so I think if we break it down that way, then it becomes easier because we can say they fucking whiffed it.
But by allowing for mods and stuff, then it can nail it
because of what's there. Like there is potential there, like a lot of potential there.
Again, the big idea is good. It's got a good big idea in it.
They just whiffed it, but then the community comes along and makes it so that I can actually have a nailed experience, right? Yeah.
So it's a
see-
Bethesda game.
I did see that they had a patch to introduce field of view.
Oh yeah, that was the thing I was going to say because
So-
we talked about that because we were just like laughing about that as an example. But I discovered why they don't have because they have like they always have the INI file you can go in and just like add settings to, you know, and they share the same names as like past Bethesda games. So people already were like, hey, if you just go into your INI file, you can change your field of view by adding these settings, you know. So I did that because it's just nice to be able to see shit, and then discovered that as I was like walking through, like exploring rooms and doing stuff, that things would just fall off of the wall next to me, right? Because like something about they've tied field of view
To loading
to
assets and stuff.
or no, to something about like your collision, like bounding box or something, so that as I'm just like if I'm like walking along a shelf with my field of view set to a higher number, it's as if my shoulders
What?
are like knocking stuff off of the shelf, right?
Your
So there's-
peripheral vision has a
So okay,
telekinetic
maybe
power.
maybe it's that your field of view didn't get wider, just you got wider.
That's what I'm thinking. I wonder if they
Yeah, something- yeah, something like that.
scaled you that way.
Yeah. Yeah, so once I had that experience, I was like, oh, I see. So there's an actual problem here that they couldn't overcome quickly.
And
Well,
they
apparently
never
could.
planned.
So they
on it.
just-
fucking patched it. They did patch it this last week.
Yeah, I don't know
so
what they
apparently
did.
could.
So I'll have to try the slider and see what happens. Maybe
Yeah.
the slider does something different somehow than the INI settings.
So they're like, no, you don't understand. We wanted to add a field of view slider, but we just did such a bad job at so many other things that we couldn't do it. There's all this. Adding field of view breaks the physics, I guess, of our game.
That's a surprise.
Somehow.
That's a big surprise.
That's
Yeah,
something.
and I haven't even got into like the NPC interact. Like they talk
I
over
don't even
each
want
other
to know, man.
constantly.
It's crazy. Everything you
wild.
described about this is like every part of this game is
is kind of a pain in the
kind
ass.
of a pain in the ass, and it's like,
It is
why do they
janky
do
as
this?
hell. Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, I want because the moment to moment like combat and then like some of the stories and stuff, like the stuff that I love from Bethesda games, like because I want it to be good. That's why I'm putting in the effort to
Yeah,
like try to make it
yeah.
into a good. And I can see the
Everybody- yeah.
potential. You know, I can see how it could be good. And there are a lot of people like who are doing the similar thing where they're finding the parts of it that they can turn into that really because there are a lot of people who like love this ship crafting stuff, right? Like I've seen some wild stuff that people have made. My own experience with the ship crafting menu, once I watched a few videos to learn how it worked, was holy shit, it is hard to build stuff and confusing as hell and like
Tedious.
yeah, and it's a whole problem of like interacting in 3D, right? It's like you're building a 3D ship, but it's a 2D interface and trying to get things to go to the right spot. Fucking nightmare. So like, but you know, people like figured it out. They learned the tricks that they can use to make stuff work, and I think that's kind of the interesting thing about like games in general, but especially franchises, right? When people want things to be good,
Yeah.
if they can make it good, right? And I think that's the huge difference with Bethesda versus other things is that they kind of just make janky ass stuff, right? But they do it in a way that there's enough potential there
that
and
other people can see it
and that
fix
people
it.
can see it, and it's
Or like,
moddable. It's moddable out of the gate, and so they just say, "Hey,
But if- I think
we've
it's
given
the
you
thing.
the sandbox. You know,
Here's
we've given
the
you a
thing.
game engine. I'm not saying this is good.
No,
I'm
no,
just
I
saying-
know. But what I find just wild about it is that it is not hard to see the problems you were talking about. So the thing, I get when there's certain games where it's like you can see like, oh, it's kind of potential, but in order to fix that, it's like, oh my god, it's like a redesign, right, of like the core whole fucking thing. That is not what you're talking about here. What you're talking about here is like very fucking obvious things that just why are they bad if it's so easy for everybody to experience them? And then if the reality is that the scale of the fix required is not a full scale, like, oh yeah, if you just like change this aspect of the whole fucking game. No, it's just like, I don't know, give the player a jetpack to start with and don't worry about that fucking one node. Is there one jetpack node in the tree?
Yeah.
Just give me a different node and give me the fucking jetpack. What is the deal?
Yeah,
Or
and if it's like,
give
oh
me an
well,
inventory that
you know,
works.
yeah, and if it's like, oh well, we want players to look forward to it. It's like give them the jetpack and just give them ways to upgrade it. Later.
Yeah,
like,
which
then
is
they can
also-
look forward to
Which
the
is also what
upgrades,
it
you
is,
know?
right? Because like there's like 4 upgrade levels on the jetpack, right? But
Yeah,
but,
so
but
just
I'm
give me the
pretty sure
starting
it's if you
jetpack.
don't have the first one in there, you just can't use it because like you don't know how.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So again, like these are not things that are so deep that moving one around causes the whole fucking thing to explode, right? It's like
I mean,
these are
also because
surface
there's
level
there's
dumb
so
problems.
much game the fact, like, if they just didn't have over encumbrance, didn't have the oxygen meter mechanic, and just gave you a full on jetpack out of the gate, right? That would reduce your total game time by like 10%, right? In terms of like,
Yeah.
it would just make it easier to get around and do stuff, but not in a way that like somehow makes the game less.
Well, it would probably increase your game time because you'd.
It's increasing my game time, definitely. Because the only reason I'm playing is because it was so easy for me to go in and just tweak stuff.
Yeah, I think the thing I find irritating about this is that it's very hard to make a good game design, right?
Yeah.
We all agree on that.
That's the hard part.
And so whenever I play a game that the core design is good and interesting, but there's just this stupid, easy, like a relatively, of course, armchair dev, but easy mod layer on top of like just a bunch of dumb shit that for some reason exists that is janking up the experience. It makes me very irritated because I'm like, it could be, that it could be a really incredible experience. And you also know that this is not a unique thing to you. It's not a hard thing to figure out like, oh, how could you change this? There's so many ways to change this. No, it's put a fucking field of view slider in the game that doesn't make you knock stuff off walls. I don't know why that's even happening. Like, give me more inventory space in a jetpack.
And give me a space truck that I can drive around on the planet's surface that has a big old inventory in it, so I can like the stuff I get out there. It'll speed up my travel, and the stuff I get out there, I can load it into my truck.
Yeah,
and then drive it back to my ship.
You talk about those like cursed design problems, right? Where you're like, no matter how you solve it, you're really making a choice between two kinds of play, or like you're causing problems for yourself down the road. Most game design problems are that sort of thing, right? These are not those, and I think that's what's irritating. It's like, this is low hanging fruit, man, and you just left it to rot on the tree, and now the tree's covered in bugs.
And the downside here is like, you can point to the mods and be like, yeah, but mods though, right? Except what about
fucking
Xbox?
Game Pass? That's the only thing I'm thinking.
You're not modding it on console. You just have what the raw game is. And so if it's kind of like, well, without mods, it's a huge pain in the ass and it's really slow and it sucks and blah, blah.
But because
once
of
you mod it,
crossplay,
it's great.
Because of crossplay though, then you can mod your save file. Because like when I change my perks and stuff, that's just baked into the save file now, right? Like, so the mod that makes the inventory UI not suck, like I can't have that on Xbox, right? But I can have the changes I made to my save where I've got the perks that I need and I've got 1,000 pounds of storage I can carry, or whatever. So you can enough of it is hackable, that you can tweak that experience. And if you have access to a PC,
if you bought it
for $60 on PC when it's free on Game Pass, again, like the whole thing is just dumb.
Yeah,
like,
not saying it's good.
Dumb.
Yeah,
I remain disappointed. That's
well, I'm gonna keep chilling. Maybe they'll get some updates out that'll make the base game experience a little better.
Well, because otherwise it is like Fallout in space, right? Like you're just running around shooting stuff, collecting weapons, talking to people. And that aspect of it is still like a pretty good time, It's just the trappings of the being in space thing and like all these systems that they added, all this kind of stuff. And then just didn't bother to fix.
And the problem is if you're telling me that when you're playing the good part, it's good, but most of it's not good.
you gotta figure out how to skip the bad parts,
Yeah, that's the thing with it. It's like, it's just.
And it's that constant, ever-present reminder that we always end up in, which is inventory management interrupts the actual part of the games of games that are fun, right? And you need a reason to make the user manage their inventory before you just fucking have it, Like, and the idea that like the standard is to say, well, you can only carry so much stuff, but in a game where you're like building starships, right? Where there's all these like limited resources and things, like when you find a resource, like you should get it, because it's going to be hard to deal with later, right? Except that it has weight, and I got to put it somewhere. And you might not be able to really use it. Like one of the problems I'm dealing with right now is I just need adhesive, one of the reagents. I need it for everything. I need it fucking constantly. So every time I see it, I buy it. Every time, right? But for the first like 4 hours of gameplay, didn't need it because I couldn't use it for anything yet, right?
Mm-hmm. So you just threw it out.
So yeah, I would have. So I was just throwing this stuff out or selling it or whatever. And now all of a sudden I'm like, God damn it, I got to find somebody who has adhesive, right? And I'm like flying from planet to planet, landing on planets, talking to people, just trying to find some tape. Yeah, and I wouldn't have had to, or at least as much, If I guess first of all, if I knew that adhesive was important, because there's no way to have known that for the first few hours of gameplay. But if I didn't start with limited inventory, that was so. Again, like it doesn't match with the gameplay, and I don't know. I think I'm so passionate about inventory management because it is far and away the number one thing that kicks me out of every fucking game I play. Because eventually, the game is just inventory management, and if I wanted to do chores, I'd stop playing video games and go do chores, you know?
Yeah, there's two mechanics the games shouldn't have: inventory management and mana. But we'll talk about that another time because that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. And as always, if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It helps get some exposure for the game and keeps it high in the algorithms on Steam. So it'll help us out a lot. So thank you very much. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.